Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone. We're so glad you joined us today for this webinar, Introduction to Competency-Based Education. If you haven't already, we welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat and to use it freely throughout today's session to ask questions and offer comments or resources. And we'll be having some time for Q&A later in the webinar. I'm Elliot Levine, and I'm the Research Director at the Aurora Institute and lead the Competency Works initiative. Also presenting today from the Aurora Institute is Fred Jones, our Policy Director, and we're thrilled to have today with us Trianne Hontiveros and Greg Zimdahl from the Young Women's Leadership School of Astoria in New York City. Trianne is an 11th grader and a youth ambassador for the school, and Greg is a humanities instructor and an instructional coach for Mastery-based learning. And Greg and Trianne, we know that your school has been a leader in this work for many years, so we're excited to hear about your experiences and share your expertise with competency-based learning. Next slide, please. So today's session will give you a broad overview of competency-based education, which some districts call mastery-based or proficiency-based education. And we'll talk about why we need to change our current system, the great advances that are already happening across the country, and strategies we can use to transform our schools and the education system as a whole. We'll also be sharing a lot of resources that you can use to go deeper in your own work in your schools and organizations. We wanted to start with a quick poll to see who's here today, which will be really helpful to know as we're presenting. Natalie, could you start the poll? I am not seeing it on my screen. Maybe you all are. There it is. Okay, great. So you should see a question on your screen, and it would be great if you could take a few seconds to answer it. We'll just wait. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. We'll just give it a few more seconds. All right, I don't see many more getting added. So Natalie, could you show the results? Great. So we have, I hope you're all seeing the results. We have, it looks like about 40% folks here are K-12 educators, about 19% are district and school administrators, and then we have some parent, guardian, caregivers. Trianne, it looks like you might be the only student here, and we have nonprofit leaders and a few researchers and policymakers. So great, thank you everybody for sharing. That's really helpful to know who's here. And next slide, please. I'm just going to jump in. So we want to start with talking about what is competency-based education. And I'll start by reviewing the Aurora Institute's 7-part definition, which was developed in collaboration with many experts in the field. And you can also consult the report that's shown here. We'll be putting a link for that in the chat. And you can also look in the chat for links to some of the other resources we'll be talking about. It's important to start by saying that there's not a single prescribed way to do competency-based education, but there are some common features. The first element of the definition focuses on student agency, because learning sciences research and the experience of many educators tell us that students learn more and get more deeply engaged when they're able to make important decisions about their own learning, and when they have the opportunity to create and apply knowledge rather than just receiving it passively. Second, assessment can't be only about grading. It needs to be meaningful and positive and empowering, and provide information that can guide next steps for both students and teachers. And in competency-based education, assessment is personalized which means that students don't necessarily take all the same assessments at the same time and in the same order. They have multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery, and teachers do use summative assessments, but they're balanced with formative assessments and clear communication about how each student is progressing and what supports they need to move forward. Many of the assessments are also performance-based, where students can show and apply what they've learned. Next slide, please. So in competency-based schools, students receive timely, differentiated supports based on their individual learning needs, which means providing learning opportunities that are targeted to students' current level of competency. It also means having strategies to know when there are gaps in their learning and addressing them quickly so students can get back on track and don't get disengaged or demoralized. An important thing about competency-based schools is that they make a commitment to keep on innovating until all students are mastering learning expectations. Students also progress based on demonstrating their mastery, not based on how much time they've spent in a classroom. And they learn actively using different pathways and varied pacing, so there's not only one route to get there. And when we say that traditional education is time-based or based on seat time, what we mean is that students often advance to the next grade or course after a predetermined amount of time, like a semester or a year, even if they haven't mastered the material in some cases. And you also have the opposite situation where many students have to continue in a course even after they've already mastered the material. In a competency-based system, learners advance when they demonstrate mastery, not after a predetermined amount of time, and the pathways are personalized based on the student's needs and preferences, which sometimes means that they learn and demonstrate mastery in different ways. And the quality principles book shown here is another really useful resource if you're trying to go deeper on all of the ideas we're talking about today. Next slide, please. The next element is about equity, and we believe that creating a competency-based education system is an essential part of eliminating the deep inequities in our traditional system, which is why we say that strategies to ensure equity for all students are embedded in the culture, structure, and pedagogy of competency-based systems. And that means interrupting inequitable practices, examining biases, creating culturally responsive environments. And the report shown here goes into much greater depth about what that all means in a competency-based system. Finally, the seventh element has a lot in it, so let's take a look at the parts. Having rigorous common expectations is also an equity strategy, so different students are not held to different standards, which we know happens across zip codes, across settings. And the part about knowledge, skills, and dispositions points to our focus on a broader set of outcomes that prepare students for lifelong learning and college and career, like self-direction, collaboration, social emotional skills, all of which students need to apply their learning in new contexts. So that's really important in competency-based education. And finally, the standards need to be more explicit and transparent than they often are in the traditional system, which helps students know what they're supposed to be learning and how to improve and to take ownership of their learning. Next slide, please. So districts turn to competency-based education for a variety of reasons. I've already mentioned most of the ones here, but I did want to add that during the pandemic, competency-based schools have found that it was a real advantage that students were accustomed to taking responsibility for their learning and being able to work at their own pace and having very transparent access to learning expectations and learning materials. And all of those are inherent to a CBE approach. Next slide, please. So I've used the word personalized a few times. I just want to say what we mean by that. What we mean, this is our definition of personalized learning, tailoring learning for each student's strengths, needs, and interests, including enabling student voice and choice in what, how, when, and where they learn to provide flexibility and supports to ensure mastery of the highest standards possible. Next slide, please. I want to take a quick look at how competency-based education is advancing across the country. Back in 2012, there were about a dozen states with pilots and just a few states with advanced policies that enabled competency-based education or credit flexibility policies. Next slide. Moving ahead to our most recent map in 2019, that number had doubled and 49 states had enacted policies that enable some aspects of competency-based education, such as seat time waivers. And I know our policy team is working on the updated map as well. So clearly the field is growing. And I'm going to turn it over to Fred now. And could we have the next slide, please?
Great, thank you, Elliot. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. My name is Fred Jones. I'm the policy director here at the Aurora Institute, and today I'm going to be talking about ways in which policies can support and enable competency-based education and personalized learning. Can we go to the next slide? In this slide, we have put together, it is an outline of different entry points to both create and support competency-based education. So we have the first prong here, states getting started. We also have states moving forward and states taking a comprehensive approach, and it outlines very specific state and or in some instances federal policies and local efforts to both enable and create sustained CBE practices and policies over time. What I would like to highlight is, though this slide is situated in somewhat of a linear fashion, it does not imply that states and or local districts have to move in a linear fashion to actually implement these policies. States and local districts have to actually do a self-assessment to figure out, what is politically feasible in this moment in terms of us trying to implement CBE. Where within our local context are we already doing this work, and where is the energy? So where are community advocates, educators, and learners all excited about different aspects or different components of this stream of work? So the different entry points, and from there we recommend folks expanding on from the energy and what's politically feasible as well. One thing I would like to call special attention to is the portrait of the graduate, which is the first element to the left. And the portrait of a graduate, also known as a profile of a graduate, is essentially a framework in which actually schools, districts, and or states can use to identify the skills, knowledge, and experience each graduate should have once they exit the K-12 system. And what this does is essentially three different things. It allows multiple actors to come together across the community, within the schools, within the government, to redefine success and set and outline a future-focused education. So what is needed to move forward to ensure our graduates have the skills that we want them to have I think secondly, what it does is also provide a roadmap and a framework for both practice, implementing and designing curriculum, but also setting policy and setting the structure for both funding and human capital that's necessary for students to be successful. And so it's just a very critical component for CVE to be to start, but also to build from. So it's an important building block. If we go to the next slide. And so the next slide.
And Natalie, could you go to the next slide, please?
Hi there. You should be seeing the next slide. Maybe it's still taking a moment to come through.
Okay. I don't see it on my end here. Do you guys see the different examples of portraits of a profile of a graduate? It's looking like others are not.
Just the title slide.
Yes, this is it. I see it now. I hope others do as well. And it seems like from the chat we do. So this is essentially a quick analysis of different states and/or regions that have developed a profile of a graduate or have indicated that they will develop a profile of a graduate. So it's almost, a quarter of our states across the country. And we have every belief that even more states will be developing their own graduate profile. If we go to the next one, next slide, please. And then additionally, there's just like some actually examples of this from Utah, Virginia, and Vermont. You can see that they look and feel very different. If you go to the next slide, please. Yes, and then here's another set of examples as well in terms of how the graduate profiles look. And for example, in South Carolina, they've broken up their graduate profile into a list of world-class knowledge, world-class skills, life and career characteristics. However, in Central New Mexico, the way that they've developed their graduate profile is actually from the student's perspective. And so within the context of their encompassing hot balloon here, they have, I know and respect myself, I know and respect others, I am resourceful, for example. So it's just a different approach in terms of how this information is articulated. And it looks different. And so states and/or local districts or even regions can use these as examples in developing your own profile of a graduate. Go to the next slide, please. And so some of the common themes that we have seen throughout is knowledge and content mastery, habits of success. So things like critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and career exploration. Really having an opportunity for students, especially older students, to access real world experiences while they're still within the elementary and secondary school system. Go to the next slide, please. Another entry point that I mentioned earlier, that was on the visual earlier, is around innovation zones. And innovation zones are essentially a state and or a district mechanism to have flexibility from certain laws and regulations to advance innovation. And almost half the states across the country have some form of an innovation zone, whether it's at the state or district level. And most recently, we put together a policy brief on the status of innovation zones this past May, which goes into much more detail than I am able to go into here. I think the main takeaway, however, is innovation zones is a mechanism that states and districts use to advance innovation, and oftentimes this is directly linked to student-centered learning. So this is relief oftentimes from seat time to mastery-based learning, or the opportunity to extend the calendar year, or the opportunity to try a new curriculum that's focused much more on the student. So things that aren't typically conducted in the traditional education system. Can we go to the next slide? And for example, just a couple of state examples. New Hampshire advanced a bill this past year that would allow a state innovation zone, so for districts and schools to be named innovation zones and allow flexibility in terms of the length of the school day or the school year, student promotion, and graduation criteria. So changing actually what it takes to graduate from high school. Go to the next slide. And then also in South Carolina, they also amended their existing innovation zones law that would allow multiple schools within a district to be named a school of innovation. And even in South Carolina, most of the applications that the State Department is receiving has to do almost centrally with student-centered learning policies, really around developing more personalized curriculum, and also having schools being released from seat time criteria as well. Go to the next slide. I just wanted to name just a couple more examples. In North Dakota, they've created actually 2 bills to help with credit flexibility and multiple pathways. So essentially what they've done is amended their graduation requirements that allow for more out of school time, such as more real life experiences, externships and internships to actually go towards their, or have those experiences but be put towards their credit, and provide different alternative education opportunities outside of the classroom. Go to the next slide, please. And just want to cite a couple more examples of states moving forward along this entry point continuum. Go to the next slide. Washington, the state of Washington has been doing an amazing job advancing competency-based education. They've most recently actually started a mastery-based learning collaborative, but a lot of their efforts actually started a few years ago when they created a task force to help identify different barriers to mastery-based learning, also competency-based education, and provided recommendations to actually eliminate some of these barriers. And so it was a work group essentially. And so one of the things that I wanted to just articulate is, in some instances, the starting point is with a task force or a pilot using the information from that experience to help go to the next phase. And so we see in Washington State, they started with a task force and now they're moving to a more learning-based collaborative model at this point. And if we go to the next slide. One thing I just wanted to close on actually is an op-ed that was just actually published in Education, in Ed Week, in Education Weekly, and a series of superintendents across the country came together to talk about why it's important for competency-based education to be implemented at this moment. And there's a link here and we can share the slide later, but just a quick quote I wanted to read to close with. It says, "The students we serve cannot afford to have an empty promised diploma. All students deserve to graduate with a credential that has real value in the changing economy, no matter their plans after high school. achieving real equity in education does not mean all kids learn the same things at the same pace, but at a minimum, equity dictates all kids get the support they need to be educated for success in life after high school. And so we believe not only through practice, but the policies that we've helped outline gets both advances equity, but also helps serve our students at this particular critical juncture in our nation's history. So with that, I will come to a close and will gladly be able to accept some questions near the end of this presentation.
Great, thank you, Fred. It's great to hear about so many policy advances in states across the country. One place where really groundbreaking work has been happening is at the Young Women's Leadership School of Astoria in New York City. And we're thrilled to have Trianne Hontiveros and Greg Zimdahl here to tell us more about what competency-based education looks like at their school. So Trianne and Greg, thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Again, my name is Greg Zimdahl. I am a humanities instructor at the Young Women's Leadership School in Astoria, Queens. We are a single-sex public school located in Queens, New York, which means all our students, because our school is located in New York, our students have to take state mandated tests. We are also have been practicing mastery-based learning here for over a decade. I'm excited to share with you about our journey as a school, what brought us to competency-based learning, and some of the decisions we've made, some of the roadblocks we've hit, and how we've overcome them. And then I'm joined here with one of our very own students, Trianne, who will share a little bit about her journey at a mastery school. So our school was founded in 2006. I entered the school in 2007. And at that time, our school had a 1, 2, 3, 4 grading scale. And students received 2 grades, one for their content specific skills and one a work habits grade. And although I was used to numbers as a student myself, I received from a 0 to a 100 scale in high school. And I knew about other schools that had a 4-point scale. I remember as a student being uncomfortable and not really having the information that I needed to advocate for myself about my own learning. And that was amplified as a teacher. I always felt uncomfortable giving students. And I actually even found ways of trying to be more specific with my grading by adding a plus or a minus. But I wasn't alone in feeling that uncomfortability and feeling we weren't giving kids any information about their own learning, which is why shortly after I came to Twills, our principal introduced this idea of competency-based learning. And it's at that point that we pivoted to a scale for NY, which equals not yet, MS for meeting standards, and ES. And this was really to give kids more information about their own learning. But at this point, each individual teacher created their own learning outcomes. So as a school, we used this scale, these different levels, so students at least had some knowledge of where they were in their proficiency of these skills, but we all had different learning outcomes. Which is why in the next 2 years, we decided to try to create some vertical alignment, and we met as departments to create some department outcomes. So for example, I was a member of the history department. We created an outcome about analyzing primary sources. The science department meant one of their outcomes might have been about how using reference tables to answer a scientific question, right? So we were doing our best to create some common language around mastery at our school. And that was our next stage, our next step in doing that. But it really wasn't creating the common language that we were hoping for. And there wasn't, I think this goes back to something Fred said about the portrait of a graduate. In about 2012, we met as a staff to really think about what we wanted all of our students to leave after 12th grade being able to do? What were the transferable skills that we wanted them to have mastered so that they were ready for college, career, and life? Which is why in 2012, we met and decided on what we call our 12 shared outcomes. They're shared because it doesn't matter if you're in a math class or in a drama class or tech class, all students at our school are practiced and are taught and are assessed on these 10 outcomes. And this really created the common language that we wanted. And yet we realized, and after we started using these outcomes in our own classes, we realized that it wasn't giving us, the students, the transparency that we had hoped for, that they were too big, too large. So we met, as we do each year, we met and we decided that we needed to break down those outcomes into what we call outcome targets. So even though, for example, all classes have students practice and learn how to argue, in a science class, that might be about how to collect and record data following a scientific procedure. Whereas in a drama class, that might be about using vocabulary that is authentic and integral. So we have these larger outcomes that have now been broken down into these more specific outcome targets. And this is all about, again, giving students transparency. And then we decided that we wanted to create more vertical alignment. We wanted to think about what the experience for a sixth grader was compared to a student in an AP class. So we met with our departments to spiral our rubrics, to think about how the skill could deepen and become more rigorous in their experience here at TWILS. So we thought about that from a 6th to 12th or AP experience. And since then, and most recently, starting in 2019, we started using student work, using student input to revise our rubrics to make sure that the criterion was as clear as possible, and that there was clear, it was easy to differentiate between meeting standards work and exceeding standards work. And this year, our department teams are working towards meeting 2 long goals related to mastery implementation. So the journey continues. We're excited also to announce the release of, hopefully this winter, these comprehensive mastery handbooks for both teachers and students and parents, to help them, be inducted into our competency-based grading system, our teaching and learning practices here at TWILS, and to be really used as a professional development tool to kind of drive this work. So just on a quick note, what is a report card look at our school with all that we talked about? We use the digital platform Jump Rope. You can see here, this is, it's hard to see, it's kind of small, but for a pre-calculus class, you can see the shared outcomes are in these larger, they're bolded, and then below them are the outcome targets. And you can see here the rating for each of those outcome targets. A student can earn an ES, which means they're performing the skill at or above grade level. MS means they're performing the skill at grade level. And a not yet means that they have not yet performed this skill, right? That they're going to be, and they know that they'll receive multiple opportunities to keep practicing and demonstrate mastery of that skill. And those ratings are determined by what we call evidence. Right? This is the opportunities, these accessible moments where students can demonstrate mastery of that skill, and that turns into a final rating here. We use the outcomes when we're providing feedback. Here's an example of a Supreme Court op-ed that a student wrote in an 11th grade class. Here you can see the teacher is pointing to moments where the student was precise in their use of grammar, using the rubric language to provide feedback, also with communicate. But one of our driving forces has always been with Mastery about creating more student-centered learning, really giving students the tools to kind of make their own decisions about their learning, to be in the driver's seat. So creating this common language has really allowed students to to control their own learning. And we see this in student-led conferences where students are looking at Jump Rope, the digital platform, meeting with their parents and caretakers to talk about how they're doing with mastery of these outcomes. Students are generating their own evidence, right? They have options for, based off of how they're doing with the skills, what they would like to showcase and produce for a teacher. And self-assessment and peer assessment is a huge part where they're grading themselves using these rubrics. All right, I'm now going to turn it over to Trianne. Our school, we're in a school, and we're having a 30-second announcement right now. So should we continue and go over the announcements or pause?
Greg, I can hear you okay. I think it'll be fine to continue.
Okay.
Okay, so hi, my name is Trianne. I am an 11th grader at the Young Women's League of Astoria, and I'll be talking to you about my journey through mastery. So from kindergarten to 5th grade, I was used to report cards, parent-teacher conferences, and what I got from that was like, my only feedback was that, oh, try harder, study more, or practice more.
Hey, can we pause, please, just to give people a chance to look at the comments? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. We're getting some requests to pause. I guess we can't hear as well as I'd hoped. So sure, let's just wait till the announcements are over.
Interestingly, the announcements just finished.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Right, okay, so I can repeat. So from my kindergarten to 5th grade experience, I was used to report cards, parent-teachers conferences, and the feedback that I normally get back in school was like, hey, try harder, or study more, or practice more. I kind of like lacked the feedback, therefore I didn't know exactly what I was good at or the things that I actually need to work on. So in 6th grade, I was introduced to Mastery because I just gotten to Astoria. I slowly understood the process. Although I was still dependent on my teachers for grades and explanations because I still had that like, what I get is what I get mentality towards my grades. So in the 7th grade, I was exposed to student-led conferences. We did that like 2 times a year. That's when I exercised self-reflection. I showcased an outcome I was excelling in and an outcome that I do need work on. So I started to have a sense of ownership and understanding of my grades. So in 8th grade, that's when I started Regents testing and also started high school level courses. My classes continued to help me develop my ability to communicate, discern, and plan. Skills that I discovered helped me to find success in state-issued exams. Like for example, in my US history class, I did very well in the DBQ, or document-based question essay, because I spent the year strengthening my ability to discern, communicate, and argue. I also started to communicate better with my teachers and collaborating with them to guide me towards improvement. So during the 9th grade, that's when I started high school. I did struggle with new classes. It was challenging because it was like in a new level and such. So with mastery-based learning, I was exposed to different ways to help achieve mastery and even excel in a high school level. So group work, constant self-evaluation with teachers and advisors, such as like weekly jump rope checks, after school supports, and most importantly, like positive feedback. In the 10th grade, especially through online learning, mastery-based was very beneficial. It pushed us students to be on top of our grades and work. It was a key time for clear communications with teachers and clear demonstration of understanding. That year still allowed us students to work closely together, even if we were virtual. And that was also the time where I became a Master Ambassador, where I was able to use my student voice to show what best fit our education. and now I'm in 11th grade, junior year. I constantly look back to rubrics for guidance in AP classes. I know it helped me a lot to see what is expected of me and what I can do to further improve my work. For teachers, feedback was definitely key. It built enough confidence in me to know that when I get an NY or an MS, I know that I can all grow from it and see it as a learning opportunity instead of as like a failure. So outside of school, Mastery has helped me a lot in many ways. In my first internship during the summer, I worked in an urgent care, and I was able to use my communication, collaboration, and precision skills to ensure safety in our patients and work efficiently with my coworkers.
Awesome. And our journey here at TWILS, as you can see, it's been a long process. We are constantly trying to find ways to make our grading practices, our teaching and learning more equitable, more student-centered. So the journey continues for us, and it continues for Trianne, and we can't wait to see what happens next. So thank you for hearing a little bit about our school.
It's been a pleasure, Greg and Trianne. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so valuable not only to hear some of the nuts and bolts of what you've done, really how it happens, how you roll it out, but also just to hear that it's a journey, because enough schools and districts have gone through this now that it's just really clear that this is a multi-year, large transformation. It's not a couple of professional learning days in August. And there's a lot of great tools to help schools make those transitions, as we'll talk about shortly. But no, it's great to hear what you're doing. And now we have time to address some of your questions. I know people have been putting some questions in the chat. Feel free to add more. And Fred, I think you're going to start us off with the first question.
Yeah, I actually, there's a number of excellent questions that came in, even most recently. This is actually directed to Greg and Trianne. Says, how have you worked with colleges to help them understand a non-traditional transcript?
Great question. So we are fortunate to have what we call a college-bound counselor here at TWILS, who works closely with the students and with the colleges. Thankfully, we see a growing number of colleges being really responsive to competency-based grading systems. In fact, they actually welcome it because it gives them very specific information about the student's skill level, as opposed to just seeing like a number like a 93. Here at TWILS, when we give them our transcript, it breaks breaks the students in each course down to like their level of mastery in each of their skills. We also provide each school with a little one-pager about our grading system, so they know how to navigate our transcript. But we've only heard positive things from our college-bound counselor about schools looking at our mastery transcript. Now on Jump Rope, our digital platform right now, so those NYs, MSs, and ESs are converted into a number grade. So the students do end up on their transcripts receiving a 0 to 100. There's a conversion that converts that to a number grade that is reported to colleges. Right now, that number is turned off, so students don't have the number on there, and that's really to kind of focus on their mastery of the different outcome targets. But for reporting purposes, we still have that conversion.
Great, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a number here, and one's actually, I think, Elliot, you would be good to respond to. It came earlier in the presentation, but someone asked, how does competency-based education and personalized learning interplay? And maybe you can take a stab at it. I know Susan answered the question, but maybe you can also take a stab at that.
Sure, and I saw that Christy Kingham, who's on the call, who used to work at the Young Women's Leadership School of Astoria, mentioned that that TWILS, if I'm pronouncing your acronym right, that TWILS also integrates CBE and PBL, the competency-based education and project-based learning. And so while we have the practice experts in our midst, do you want to talk about that a bit, Greg or Trianne?
I am so sorry. I was excited that you mentioned Christy's name, and two, I was responding to a question on the chat. So can you repeat the question, Elliot, please?
This has to do about the interplay with project-based learning and competency-based education and how you see those two going together.
Yeah, so project-based learning is a through line in all of our courses here at Twills because it does a nice job of providing students with learning experiences that require transfer of the skills of our outcome targets in authentic and in real settings. So for us to feel like a student is able to master a skill, we want to see that student apply that skill in new contexts and in an authentic context. So project-based learning is just naturally allows for that to happen. Yeah, they just are married perfectly together.
And Trianne, I saw a question that someone specifically asked you. I'm just scrolling back up. Angelique said, Trianne, thank you for sharing your experience with us. It is very important to know that the CBE system works from the student's perspective. How much more do you feel that the CBE system engaged you in deepening and motivating you in meeting your education goals?
So to answer that question, to me, it's all about the positive feedback that I got from my teachers and basically the relationship that I got from my teachers. So when I hear feedback that is highlighting what I know I do good in, and the feedback also includes things that I need to work on, it's definitely motivating for me as a student to also work on that as well.
Great, thank you. Fred, did you have another question to tee up, or I see some?
There are more coming in. One from Victoria saying,
yeah, I'd be happy. I know Nathan has a question about parents' roles and caretakers, understanding of CBE. So as I mentioned, we're working on our Mastery Handbook, a separate one for parents and caretakers and students to provide even more support with their introduction to mastery-based learning. A lot of our students are coming like Trianne from schools that had a traditional approach to grading. So the work that's involved in that is right now holding workshops for parents. For a while they were digital. Student-led conferences that happen, the first one happens in November, is often a good moment for them to hear from their child about their own learning and to go on to jump rope with them, and to also then engage in workshops. We have a parent coordinator who does a lot of outreach. And we have a mastery team here that Trianne is a mastery ambassador of, that a part of that our team is to think about ways of engaging parents so they can understand, because the transparency that I talked about, yes, of course, is for students to be able to have more agency and to self-advocate, but we can't do this alone. We want to, of course, involve parents and caretakers in also supporting their child, so they need to understand what they can do, and they understand a little bit about mastery. So that's something that we also, as part of our journey, that we're working towards.
Greg, we had another question come in saying, can you please speak to the relationship between CBE and its more individual mindset and standardized state tests, which is a more collective mindset, and how you guys are addressing both of those at the same time?
I think that also connects with I hear that a lot with project-based learning. I think what we ask of our educators is to, deeply understand and internalize the exam itself. What are the, looking at and analyzing the exam, looking at the, like, oh, this is really the test is asking the student to discern here, right? So looking at looking at our outcome targets and looking for those skills in the exams and teaching to those skills, like Trianne mentioned in her US history class in 8th grade, they had to take this state test. And so her teacher realized that a huge part of that is to be able to read and analyze primary sources, which is discerning, right? And then formulating conclusions and then writing an argument. So it starts with the teacher kind of understanding what is being asked on that test, and then embedding both the skills and the content into the larger unit projects. So by the time the student takes that test, they, like Trianne, they find success because they know how to discern, they know how to be precise. It's just being asked on an assessment.
I know that we probably need to shift over to get our final slides. So much of these 1-hour discussions where we try to introduce competency-based education inevitably means that we are scratching the surface, and part of what our final slides are offering a lot of resources about how to go deeper. So I don't know if we'll have time at the end for another minute or two of questions, but I just wanted to jump into some resources. And it's been really great to have everyone's questions. And Greg and Trianne, really appreciate the excellent, so helpful insights from your day-to-day work and your work over many years, Greg. So could I have the next slide, please? So we do want to share some of the many resources that are available to support continuing this conversation. And one of the big parts of those resources are the huge number and growing number of organizations that are supporting work around mastery-based, competency-based learning. Shown here, they've developed really helpful writings, online resources, professional learning opportunities, micro-credentials, research. There's so much that's been done. We just wanted to talk about it a little bit and have you know that we will be making these slides and this recording available. So you can go back and look at some of these that we're going to be going through quite quickly. And I'll also mention that if you're looking for an organization to help you with different parts of this work, please feel free to reach out and contact us. We'd be happy to talk with you to understand your situation better and offer any suggestions about which organizations might be most helpful to connect with. Next slide, please. I'll share a few resources from the Aurora Institute. Our annual symposium is coming up in a couple of weeks, and it's the largest gathering of the competency-based education field every year. And it has dozens of workshops and keynotes on pretty much every aspect of the work. And we're very excited this year that Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona is offering an opening keynote for the conference, which is in about 10 or 11 days, starting about 10 or 11 days. And next slide, please. Oh, and I'll say you can register for that on our website. The Aurora Institute website has a wide range of publications on practice and policy issues. Some of our most recent ones are shown here, including the ones that Alexis has been pasting into the chat, these ones along the top that frame the field and talk about the definition and quality principles, equity, and given time, I'm not going to go into depth, but there's just a lot here on policy priorities, fostering habits of success, mastery-based mathematics, and strengthening local assessment systems. A lot of these are based on work that's being done by schools and states across the country for many years. And Can we go to the next slide, please? I wanted to mention the 2 Aurora Institute blogs, which are 2 of many excellent blogs in the field across those other organizations I showed on a previous slide. These share trends and analysis, lessons learned in practice and policy. And I'll mention that the blog post on the lower left, which we get so many visitors to, Competency-Based Education Across America, brings together about 200 of our blog posts from our visits to schools across the country. So it can help you find competency-based schools near you to visit or to use as examples. But pretty much any topic in competency-based education, practice, and policy, if you search our website, you'll find something in these 2 blogs. Next slide, please. So the last 2 slides are some books and other resources from many organizations that are doing fantastic work in advancing competency-based education. So we hope you'll also look at those and get to know the many different resources that are available. The first 3, the top left, are just broad overview books of the field of competency-based education, and really great information if you're thinking about any aspect of your transition. The rest are more targeted to scheduling, student agency, educator competencies, assessment systems, project-based learning, school culture, grading, and transcripts. So really in-depth treatments of any topic that you're interested in. Could I have the last slide, or the next slide, I should say? These are more, again, going in deep on specific issues. Some of these are online resources, helping students develop self-direction, how to do virtual portfolio defenses, which are a big part of student agency and owning their learning, developing micro-credentials for teachers to help them become student-centered educators, and alternatives to seat time, how you do attendance around that, all kinds of resources here, which, I hope you'll go back and take a deeper look at. And the next slide, please. I don't think we have time for more Q&A, but could we go to the next slide? Great, so just wanted to wrap up here, and we do have a 1-minute survey that we wanted to ask if you could take. It's just 3 questions, and to help us learn how this was for you, the link to the survey is in the chat. And while you're doing that, yeah, so just wanted to wrap up by saying that we really thank Greg and Trianne for joining us and sharing their expertise about competency-based education. We appreciate all of you joining us today and for all of your excellent questions and comments in the chat. Again, we will be sending you an email very soon when the slide deck and session recording are available on our website. And we do hope you'll feel free to reach out to us if we can be of any help, and we'll wrap it up there. So thanks very much, everyone, and great to see you, and take care. Greg, I see you're still there. Just wanted to say thanks.
I was just typing. Thank you so much for inviting us to share our experience. Trianne went off to volleyball, and I actually have a mastery meeting. So I'm sure we'll be in touch. Yes.
I'm sure you do. All right.
Thank you, Fred.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Take care,
Greg, thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Bye.